Thank you, Lawrence. I'd like to join the previous speakers in thanking the organizers for inviting us to speak. It's been thought-provoking, the discussions, and I'm very happy to be part of it. We're particularly happy that you've taken this opportunity to actually give us elements for reflecting in terms of the more effective planning of the meetings that will be happening at the beginning of next year. So thank you twice. And in my presentation, I guess the major point that I would like to make is that there are many changes occurring within and around food systems. Some of these have the potential to disrupt food chains. Some have the potential, actually, to give us the tools to make food safety systems stronger and to address long-standing issues of social and environmental sustainability. So this is a critical moment for us to define what we would like to be the future of food safety and to prepare ourselves to work to get it right. We have been saying for a long time that we understand that food safety is the fundamental building block for food security, and we know that the ICN2 framework for action actually specifically highlights food safety actions to be taken. But we've said similar things in the past. The 1996 World Food Summit with the definition of food security incorporating food safety, the 2004 voluntary guidelines for the right to food that were adopted by FAO, they all emphasized the importance of food safety, but we didn't really see the follow-up that we might have hoped for. The WHO-led study, the FERG study that's been mentioned so many times yesterday and today, tells us that we have not done well enough in food safety. The burden is too high and it's disproportionately borne by the poor. And in this increasingly unequal world, failure to address food safety adequately has reinforced underprivilege. So whatever we've been doing so far, it's not enough, and the job is becoming more complex. So our Director General introduced the two meetings that FAO and WHO are planning for next year. And it is in this context of this change that's happening. The objectives of the meeting are to identify key actions and strategies to address current and future challenges to food safety globally, and to strengthen commitment at the highest political level to scale up food safety in the global agenda. The first of the meetings is planned for Addis in February. The dates are still tentative for 11 and 12 February. And this will be followed by a more technical meeting in Geneva, the WTO headquarters, at which we will further analyze some of the key issues raised at the conference in relation to their impact on trade facilitation and market inclusiveness. The meetings will result in a ministerial statement of commitment for addressing food safety and a call to action outlining key actions and strategies that have been agreed upon. So, what are the changes that we keep talking about that are affecting food safety? The first, several people have mentioned already, we need to feed more people by 2050. We need 60% more food. We need to, if consumption trends continue in the way that they are, we expect to have to double meat production, all at a time when arable land is diminishing. Climate change is a global priority. Natural resources are under pressure. We need to be producing differently. Urbanization is changing lifestyles. It's changing food habits. It's changing opportunities. New technologies are actually affecting all aspects of the food system. So the future of food safety needs to be analyzed and understood in this context. The FAO-WHO meetings will facilitate lateral thinking about food safety among trade, health, and agriculture sectors in the context of sustainable development and our changing food system. The meetings will seek agreement on priorities for action that will enable coherent development planning with appropriate emphasis on food safety. And we recognize the importance of civil society and private sector voices in this discussion. For the remainder of this presentation, I would like to touch on some of the issues that we, with our colleagues in WHO, have been considering for further exploration at next year's meetings. Climate change. FAO has played a significant role in sensitizing the world to the importance of agriculture in the fight to curb climate change. At the Bonn Climate Change Conference in November 2017, that was the COP23, the parties agreed to the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture. This decision recognizes the importance of agriculture in responding to climate change, as well as the vulnerabilities of agriculture to climate change. And we, the food safety community, must now work to build an understanding of the need to address food safety issues in the context of climate change mitigation and adaptation. As you can see, agriculture accounts for a lot of greenhouse gas production and a whole lot of water use. Adjusting food systems to reduce the environmental footprint is necessary. What we do want to keep the focus on, the spotlight on, is the fact that, we need to change food systems with adequate attention to the food safety implications. I have seen in various projects around the world interesting interventions on integrated agriculture and aquaculture systems, integrated poultry and aquaculture systems, and it certainly seems that in some of these cases, there hasn't been adequate attention to food safety risks. I'm not saying that we mustn't innovate along these lines, we absolutely must, but I'm just saying perhaps we need to underline very carefully the need for the necessary food safety assessments to be built into the design and operationalization of these adapted systems. As a point of interest, there has been recently talk about insect production. Yes, in the end, there is no single magic bullet. There's several approaches and several entry points to this issue of mitigation. And in preparing, we're actually doing a review on, or trying to anticipate, as my colleague from WHO says, we try to look ahead at what's coming. And with discussions around greater interest in intensification of insects, one of my colleagues is doing the review of what's going on in that domain. And it was just interesting just to note the environmental footprint numbers, that 1 kilogram of edible product of insects produces 1 gram of greenhouse gas, as opposed to 300 for chicken and nearly 3,000 for beef, and uses less than 1 liter of water as compared with 2,000 for poultry and roughly 22,000 for beef. So there's an obvious interest in this environmentally friendly production system, which is traditional in some cultures and novel in others. There are food safety issues and other production issues that entrepreneurs are struggling with at the moment. And there is a lot of legislative divergence. So these are things that we in the food safety community, as we look ahead to what's happening, we do need to be aware of what are the emerging problems or issues to be addressed if these solutions are going to be mainstreamed. FAO prepared a review of climate change food safety vulnerabilities to climate change back in 2007. And we're now in the process of updating this to try as far as possible, to be more quantitative rather than just indicative. Because if we expect countries to invest in climate change adaptation in relation to food safety, we need to be more convincing. One of the flagship issues on climate change is, of course, mycotoxins. And you've heard a lot yesterday and this morning about the problem of mycotoxins, cost and occurrence. And with climate change, of course, the occurrence, the range is spreading. Pulling from the existing data, we see that Vibrio cholera, they project based on the experience of El Nino years. They say that, 50,000 additional cholera cases per year in East Africa. And we can, leaning on FERG data, attempt to put a value on that. Issues of algal blooms. They're increasing, they're becoming more frequent, and they're becoming, and they too have a cost. There isn't a lot of systematic data, and in discussing with my colleagues in fisheries, it's even hard to get reporting on the algal blooms. To really get a grip on costs and issues, we do need a whole lot better reporting of these sorts of phenomena. Salmonellosis, Campylobacter, rotavirus, they're all foodborne diseases that are going to increase with climate change. In Kazuaki's presentation yesterday, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the new FERG 2 figures on the burden of disease with the 4 chemicals, he mentioned methyl mercury. And there is a publication that we had pulled on this. I think it reported a study in Minnesota. I refer to it because Kazuaki was saying yesterday that they measure the burden in terms of IQ loss, and this study in Minnesota put a price tag of $2 billion a year in public health costs, and something like 32 million in personal loss of lifetime earnings. So even though it's a fragmented picture, it's a way of saying, yes, climate change adaptation is necessary to address some food safety issues, and if we don't address them, there are costs. We do need better surveillance globally and better integrated surveillance to be able to better understand and predict these issues and minimize the food safety problems by being better prepared for them. Steve Jaffe, in his presentation yesterday, was demonstrating the weakness in surveillance in veterinary services. In the food safety control assessment tool that my colleague from WHO referred to, we're getting similar feedback in the assessments that we're doing, that the surveillance capacity is weak. So if getting ready for climate change and understanding climate change requires a global collaboration and a common understanding of the big picture, we do need to invest in building those capacities. The opportunity is that the global mechanisms that have been set up around climate change can facilitate investment. FAO is engaged with between 20 and 30 countries in implementing their nationally determined commitments for climate change. And when I speak to my colleagues in the climate change unit and I ask, okay, but what is there on food safety? They tell me, oh, well, nothing. And during the Codex meetings, when I speak to our Codex colleagues, they are completely disconnected in this very siloed world from ongoing national discussions about climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So my message to the food safety community is engaging at national level in these discussions is a big opportunity to enable investment in some of the development that's needed to be able to combat the food safety issues linked to climate change. There are other things that are changing. Environmental contaminants, here I've flagged some issues that are coming up and will develop or get worse as we go forward if action is not taken. Trace contaminants, Analytics are improving. We're seeing traces of things in matrices that various food matrices that we didn't expect to see them in. And the big concern in the international circles is, hey, once people see a number, they feel they must react. And I refer to a comment that Delia made yesterday: let's remember to manage risks and not manage hazards. So the mere fact that we're seeing things creates a challenge for us to develop an agreed framework for how will we deal with this sensibly. Related to that, in some way, is the issue of chemical mixtures. You know, I was at a meeting recently where someone was showing, you know, the great evolution in mycotoxin detection over the last couple decades, and how you can see 30 things at once, the same with pesticide residues. And this pushes people to say, wow, you know, we are regulating that and we are regulating that, but have we thought about what happens when they're all together? And this is an area where at the international level, the international risk assessment that FAO and WHO do, we know we have to get better. There needs to be some global harmonization of methodologies that will allow us to do this, but it is going to be incredibly complex, and it is going to require a whole lot of data. And already, with us doing simpler things, we already suffer from lack of data. Plastics and microplastics. Plastics are everywhere. Okay. There's been a lot of attention recently on microplastics in aquatic environments. According to the data that I've seen so far, nobody is ringing a huge bell of an existing public health issue, but there are many unknowns, and the trend in relation to the presence of microplastics is an upward one. It's interesting to note the apparent European proposal to address single-use plastics, and I would be very interested in understanding industry's views. How do they think this will impact on their marketing? Endocrine disruptors, again, that's not new, but I flag it here maybe because recently I have seen some specific interest in the link between endocrine disrupting substances and now the big crisis around obesity. The role that these contaminants do play or might play in obesity, although I would like to underline that while it behooves us to understand this better, let's be clear that the major issues around obesity are linked to diet and lifestyle. The etiology of obesity is very complex, and it behooves us to understand what role environmental contaminants might play. And it is an issue that seems to be getting more attention, at least in academic circles. Antimicrobial residues and antimicrobial resistance genes in the environment. You know that FAO and WHO, together with OIE, are very active, the tripartite, in relation to addressing the need to limit the spread of antimicrobial resistance. And within that broad set of work, there is an interest in better understanding the role of residues and resistance genes in the environment. Again, there are lots of unknowns. The dynamics of persistence of residues, the dynamics of exchange of genetic elements. But okay, the work is ongoing, and there are lots of new tools and technologies that will help us to get a grip on that and enable us to manage the contaminants better. Changing food and pathogen concerns. Okay, there have been several outbreaks in the last couple of years where people say, that's strange, that's interesting. We never thought we would find that in candied apples or that in flour. So it's, again, a point of interest that you can't just keep doing the same things all the time and expect that you're achieving food safety. The reasons for the change are unclear. Is it in some way adaptation of the pathogens? Is it changing of the marketing systems? Is it changing of consumer habits? or a mixture of all of those. We need to figure it out, and we need to be on top of things. The last point I wanted to flag here is in relation to, I'm glancing at my watch because Lawrence told me he'll be tolerant, but not too much. Okay, yeah, for sure. Water reuse and water quality, that water availability is going down, water reuse is increasing water reuse is going to become a requirement within the Codex system. They're looking at water quality parameters and to be able to better define what is safe enough water use at various stages of the food chain. We'll look very quickly at so far we've looked at the climate change issue, we've looked at evolutions in terms of environmental contamination. Technology and innovation is an important issue because this is where we are getting the new tools to be able to do things that we wouldn't have dreamed of not too long ago. Whole genome sequencing is high up there. And it's interesting that yesterday and this morning, several people have been mentioning from a nutritional perspective the microbiome, which is very interesting for me because from a food safety point of view, yes, the whole genome sequencing from a regulatory perspective has power in terms of trace back, okay, which makes many other countries, particularly those that don't have the understanding or the mastery of the techniques, a little bit nervous in understanding what it means if they do have to defend themselves against. So there is an issue that we have to make sure that the technology and the knowledge and the capacities are widely spread. But beyond the regulatory traceback perspective, I've been at a few presentations where industry is talking about the work they're doing on the factory microbiome and, you know, how can this sort of understanding help us perfect hygiene practice? So there's a lot of exciting things happening. Big data, we have huge computational capacity. It can help us model and predict things. It supports precision farming. I think Mauro was mentioning that earlier. Genetic manipulation. You know, we already have had problems or divergences in terms of regulatory approaches to genetically modified foods. The technologies are developing greatly. We still have divergence of views. You know, we'd better get a grip on this if we believe that this genetic modification is an important part of this adaptation, climate change adaptation. Lab-grown meat, or I see that the industry prefers to have it called clean meat. They think it has better buy-in, but whatever it is, it's new. And we have to make sure that we understand what would be the food safety risks and that we are in a position to regulate it effectively when it comes in market. The latest papers that I've seen predicts that within 5 years, we will be seeing these things on shelves, okay? There's a lot to get ready for. Diagnostic tools, they're becoming better, sometimes cheaper, mobile. This, of course, is another important tool in the hands of industry and regulators. I do want to point, though, to issues of equity. The world is already too unequal. Technology should not be driving this even further. Let's pay attention to what are the innovations that can help us in terms of social sustainability. I like the quote that I saw in a publication of the GFAR, that's the Global Farmers Research Association, talking about big data, and their plea was, you know, we see that there could be opportunities, but we're conscious of the very real risks that farmers sharing their data does not actually undermine their own advancement by favoring others who are better placed to use it. So please, let us keep that in mind. Societal engagement. Let's not complain when there's public rejection of innovation. We need early engagement. We need to take on board what consumers think about innovation, what they see as priority needs. And governance. In the end, you know, we do, as my colleague from WHO pointed out, FAO and WHO have a role in ensuring that governance is effective. I'm running out of time, and there are a couple things I know I really want to say. And one thing is, after talking about whole genome sequencing, you know, we're in an age of space exploration. We are unraveling genes. People are contemplating, you know, their great and wondrous things, and I can't believe when I see things like this that we cannot put a little bit more attention on technology transfer and adaptation for locally important value chains. I would like to see, you know, organizations charged with industrial development putting a little bit more focus on things like this. I will fly through this. We have to engage the consumer. There is so much happening with food. Food is personal. There's so many changes happening. How are we spending enough time thinking about engaging the consumer? Svetlana mentioned the World Food Safety Day that we hope the UN General Assembly will adopt later this year. This could be a powerful trigger to making people think, all of us, about how to engage and what we need to know about food. There is one point there are 2 points I'd like to say very quickly. One is, there's been a lot of talk about education, and in the case of food safety, it was interesting to see, I've read in a couple of papers where they've actually cited tenfold return on investment on food safety education. I found that was interesting, but we need more than education, we need engagement. Consumers are interested in more than just food safety. They're interested in food, they're interested in food systems, and we need to think how we communicate differently. I saw an article a colleague sent me just 2 days ago reporting on an experiment that they did in the climate change sphere, where they developed a game to engage the public in climate change, basically through role-playing, experience, and feedback. You take an action and there's some underlying models that feed back to you immediately on the impact. You know, maybe we need to use these powerful tools that are at our disposal at this time when there is so much change, and think how we can engage more effectively. Okay, working better together, and I'll fly. At international level, we need more upstream coordination on food safety, capacity development. Right now, 1 and 1 and 1 is not making 3. It's making a whole lot less. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of wasted time, a lot of created inefficiencies in the countries that we're supposed to be helping. We need to do better. FAO did make a proposal to the DAC committee of OECD regarding the creation of a new code that will enable better tracking of food safety investment in overseas development aid. So I know that proposal is going to be submitted later this year, so hopefully it will soon be easier to see what is the investment in food safety in overseas development assistance. I liked Bruce's question about voluntary or mandatory in terms of sustainability actions. It is a question I have. As countries invest in more sustainable chains, Steve said, in some of those changes, I see the business case. It is in your interest to reduce waste. I can see that. But on other things, it's not perhaps in your interest. What happens? What will happen? Will we, in the next 10-year time frame, will we see a move towards mandatory? I'm curious to know what people think, because, yes, certainly I know that there's a lot of work ongoing in terms of defining the metrics. People were talking about tracking. Cross-sectoral collaboration in countries. I guess a key point I want to make here is there's a big push, particularly with the recent ratification of the trade facilitation agreement in WTO, a lot of emphasis being made on trade facilitation, where we feel a power imbalance at countries. You know, ministries of industry and finance and trade say do this and do that, line up. Ministries of health and agriculture have to line up. There is an imbalance in between what do I need to improve food safety and the very legitimate, let me say, trade facilitation agenda that is still more focused on, okay, let's cut the delays, let's cut the, maybe we need to be much more synchronized in this, in the implementation of the two agreements, the SPS and the TFA. Public-private collaboration, great. When the number of people you have on the ground, the number of specialists, it's mind-blowing, for sure it is. The issue of one area, and I think Roberto showed it in his slide, the number, even the amount of data that you guys sit on. I know I've tried many times in the past to see, can we get some of that? And I've never been able to do that. So maybe this is there is an issue of data sharing. I'd like to figure out how that could happen. For sure, we can benefit from your insights. I'm hearing supporters and pros and cons of blockchain. You know, I like the real story. There are insights about what's happening at the forefront of the industry, and we would like to have that sort of exchange to feed our decisions. I'm getting a frown from Lawrence, so I am really at the end. The last point was a partnership. Several of you have mentioned the need for better universities, and I agree. Although the point that was being made is, well, should it be a fragmented sort of thing with some industries and some universities contributing or having partnerships? I would like to see a much more coherent move, but the fundamental agreement that we don't need isolated workshops and trainings. We need a system where food safety professionals in developing countries can deal with current problems and are prepared to deal with the emerging ones. There's plenty to do, plenty to discuss, the need to prioritize and the absolute need to work together. And I look forward to engaging with you as we continue to prepare for the meetings next year. Thank you.